My girlfriend Sophia had a childhood best friend who was practically a suicide expert. Jumping off buildings, jumping off bridges, overdosing on pills, he had mastered them all. On our wedding day, he called her nonstop like his life depended on it. Sophia, how am I supposed to live without you? And just like that, Sophia ran away from our wedding. While I was still standing there in shock, she sent me a message. It read, "Honey, I'm taking Makoto abroad for treatment. He said that as long as I stay with him for 2 years, he'll cooperate and focus on getting better. 2 years from now, I'll come back, and then we'll get married right away. I swear." Later, we ran into each other at a flower shop. When she saw me buying flowers, her face lit up with joy. She thought we could pick up where we left off. I simply smiled and handed the flowers to the florist. "Nice to meet you. This is my wife." The smile on Sophia's face instantly froze. Chapter 1. The crystal chandeliers in the 5-star hotel ballroom were so bright they could practically blind someone. Every table was decorated with heart-shaped red roses, gaudy as hell. But Sophia loved them. George stood on the stage, holding a blue velvet ring box in his hand. His palms were sweating, not because he was nervous, but because the pair of rings inside had cost him 6 months' worth of bonuses. The MC was delivering the usual wedding speech in that overly sentimental tone. From school uniforms to wedding gowns, from youth to maturity, friends and relatives from both families filled the seats below. George's mother sat in the second row wiping away tears. Whether she was genuinely moved or simply heartbroken over the cost, nobody knew. The engagement banquet was $8,800 per table, and there were 20 tables. Sophia looked beautiful today. She wore a white dress, her hair elegantly pinned up. The earrings she had on were the ones George had given her last month, a pair from Tiffany, each with a tiny diamond that had cost $23,000. Standing beside him, she lightly held his arm, her smile so perfect it could have been used in a bridal advertisement. Everything was perfect. If Sophia's phone hadn't rung, actually, it had already rung 8 times. The first time was when George slipped the engagement ring onto her finger. The ringtone was "Today you will marry me." Sophia glanced at the screen and declined the call. The second time came during the exchange of gifts. The ringtone had changed to "The moon represents my heart." She declined it again. The third, the fourth. By the 7th call, George had already learned how to continue the ceremony with a completely expressionless face. People in the audience had started whispering among themselves. George's mother looked increasingly displeased. Even the MC was getting uncomfortable. Forcing a laugh, he said, "Well, it seems our bride is very popular today." Then the phone rang for the 8th time. This time it wasn't a call, it was a video call. And not just any ringtone, a custom ringtone. "Learn meow meow." The one Sophia had specifically assigned to that person. George frowned. Sophia's face instantly turned pale as the white dress she was wearing. She released George's arm and hurriedly dug through her handbag for her phone. She moved so frantically that her lipstick fell onto the floor. "Sophia," George said calmly, "today is our engagement party." I know. Sophia replied without even looking at him. Her eyes were glued to the screen. "But this time is different," George answered. "It's always the same." The entire ballroom fell silent. Even the MC didn't know what to say anymore. He simply stood there holding the microphone like an idiot. Sophia finally answered the video call. A man's face appeared on the screen. His eyes were red. Behind him was a cliff. The sound of crashing waves could be heard in the background. "Sophia," the man said, his voice trembling with sobs, "I'm standing at the edge of a cliff. You said you'd always be there for me, right? Makoto." Sophia screamed, "Don't do anything stupid." Her voice cracked from panic. Makoto shook his head. "Without you, what's the point of living? Where are you? Tell me your location. I'll come right now." A bitter smile appeared on his face. "No, don't come. Just let me end it like this, Makoto." Sophia burst into tears. Real tears. Streams of them. "Wait for me. You have to wait for me." The call ended. Sophia looked up at George. Tears still hung on her face, her makeup slightly smeared. Yet her eyes were filled with unwavering determination, the kind of determination people had when they believed they were about to save the world. "George," she said, "Makoto is going to jump off the cliff. I have to go." George didn't say anything. He simply looked at her carefully, as if trying to memorize every detail of her face in this exact moment. He remembered 3 months ago, when his father underwent heart bypass surgery. George had waited outside the operating room for 6 hours. Sophia had promised she would come, but Makoto had suffered another depressive episode, so she went to him instead. He remembered his birthday last year. They had planned to celebrate together. Makoto had swallowed a bottle of sleeping pills, so she went to him. The year before that, and the year before that. Finally, George spoke. "This is the 3rd time." Sophia froze. "What?" George replied. "An important moment. This is the 3rd time you've left me during an important moment because of him. This time is different." He's really going to kill himself. George began counting on his fingers. The last time he tried jumping off a bridge. The time before that, he tried jumping off a building. The time before that, he turned on the gas. He looked straight at her. Which time did he actually die? Chapter 2. A collective gasp swept through the audience. Sophia's face shifted from pale to red, then from red to green. Biting her lip, she said, "George, how can you be so heartless? That's a human life." "I know." George nodded. Slowly, he closed the ring box in his hand. "So go." This time, Sophia was the one who froze. What did you say?" "I said, go." George slipped the box back into his pocket. His movements were light and careful, as though he were putting away something fragile. "Go save him." Then he paused and smiled. "After all," he said, "he needs you more." The smile was bitter, but only slightly, so faint it was almost invisible. Sophia stared at him for a full 10 seconds. During those 10 seconds, George thought she might say something. Maybe "I'm sorry." Maybe "I'll be back soon." Maybe "I love you." But she said nothing. She merely bit her lip, turned around, gathered up her skirt, and ran off the stage. Her high heels clicked rapidly against the marble floor. Tap, 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 like the ticking of a countdown clock. When she reached the ballroom entrance, she stopped for a moment and looked back. George was still standing on the stage, motionless, just watching her. The crystal chandeliers cast their light over him, illuminating his perfectly tailored suit and neatly styled hair. He looked like an actor who had prepared flawlessly for the performance, only for the play to fall apart halfway through. Sophia's lips moved slightly. George raised a hand and waved at her. Not a goodbye wave, more like a go on, get going wave, the kind people used to shoo away a mosquito. Sophia clenched her teeth, then pushed the door open and rushed out. Bang! The ballroom doors slammed shut behind her. A deathly silence settled over the room. Everyone looked at George. Their expressions were complicated. Some felt sympathy. Some felt awkward. Some were simply enjoying the drama. George's mother stood up as if she wanted to say something, but his father gently pulled her back down. The MC stood there clutching the microphone, sweat dripping down his forehead. Mr. Wang, this. George Wang walked over and took the microphone from him. He cleared his throat. His voice echoed through the ballroom speakers. Clear, steady, completely emotionless. "Friends and family, I'm sorry for letting everyone witness such an embarrassing scene." He paused and let his gaze sweep across every face in the room. "The banquet will continue. The food's already been served. It would be a waste not to eat it. Everyone, please enjoy yourselves." He gave a small smile. "Just treat it as a family gathering." A few people nearly laughed, but quickly held it back. George paused before continuing. "Oh, right. As for the gift money, everything will be refunded within 3 days through the original payment method. Thank you all for coming today. Sorry for the trouble." He bowed. A perfect bow. A full 90 degrees. Then he handed the microphone back to the MC, stepped off the stage, and returned to the main table. He sat down beside his mother. "Son." His mother's eyes were red again. "Mom, eat." George picked up his chopsticks and placed a piece of lobster into her bowl. "This lobster's pretty good. It won't taste as good once it gets cold." Then he picked up a piece for himself and put it into his mouth. Slowly, methodically. The taste was actually average. It was chilled and slightly fishy, but George ate with complete focus. One bite after another, as if he were carrying out some important task. The relatives at the table exchanged uneasy glances. Nobody dared to speak. George's father let out a sigh and raised his glass. "Come on," he said. "Let's eat." Eat. Chapter 3. The ballroom gradually became noisy again, but only barely. The murmurs were soft, like the buzzing of mosquitoes. Everyone was whispering to each other, their eyes drifting toward George every now and then. George acted as if he didn't notice. He finished half a lobster, drank a bowl of soup, and tried a piece of roast duck. None of it tasted particularly good. Still, he ate quite a lot. Halfway through the meal, his phone vibrated. It was a WeChat message from Sophia. "George, I've arrived at the airport. Makoto is in Hainan, so I have to fly there. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. When I come back, we'll hold the engagement ceremony again. Okay." George read the message and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He didn't reply. A few minutes later, another message arrived. "It's really different this time. I checked his location. He's actually standing by the cliff. George, please try to understand me." "Okay." He said that if I accompany him abroad for 2 years, he'll commit to treatment. Just 2 years. After 2 years, I'll come back, and we'll get married right away. I swear. George slowly put down his chopsticks. He picked up his phone and opened Sophia's chat window. His fingers hovered above the screen for a long time. He typed a few words, then deleted them. Typed again, deleted them again. In the end, he replied with only one sentence. "Okay, stay safe." After sending it, He switched his phone to silent mode and placed it face down on the table. The banquet continued. Some people were drinking. Some were chatting. At some point, the MC had quietly disappeared. The background music was still playing. Today you will marry me. George listened for a while, then suddenly laughed. His shoulders shook from it. His mother immediately panicked. Son, are you okay? I'm fine. George waved a hand and laughed. This song was a great choice. Today you will marry me. He hummed a line before shaking his head. Marry my ass. By the time the banquet ended, it was already 9 o'clock at night. George stood outside the hotel, seeing guests off one by one. He smiled and told everyone to take care on their way home. By the end, his face felt stiff from smiling. The last people to leave were his parents. Son, why don't you come home tonight? His mother held his hand, her eyes still red. George patted her hand gently. No, I'll go back to my own place. I'm fine. Really? His mother hesitated. As for Sophia, Mom, George cut her off. I'm tired. Let's talk about it tomorrow. His mother sighed and said nothing more. George watched his parents get into the car. He watched it drive away, watched the taillights disappear around the corner. Then he remained standing outside the hotel. The night breeze swept past him. It was a little chilly. He was wearing only a dress shirt beneath his suit jacket. Yet he didn't feel cold at all. His phone vibrated again. This time it was a call. Sophia. George stared at her name flashing on the screen for a long time, until the call disconnected by itself. She called again. He let it ring out. She called a third time. This time, George answered. George, I'm on the plane. Sophia's voice was mixed with airport announcements. She sounded rushed. Makoto's condition is still unstable. I have to accompany him overseas for treatment. The tickets are already booked. We're leaving tonight. 2 years. Just 2 years. Wait for me. Okay. George said nothing. George, are you listening? I'm listening. Sophia hurried on. Then, I'll hang up now. The plane is about to take off. Okay. When I come back, we'll get married immediately. George raised his head and looked at the night sky. There were quite a few stars tonight, blinking one after another, like countless tiny eyes watching from above. Sophia, he said softly, do you remember the day my father had surgery? There was a pause. Then he continued. You said the exact same thing that day. Chapter 4. Silence suddenly fell on the other end of the line. You said, wait for me. I'll be there when I get back. George continued. But you never came back. Sophia stammered. That time was. It doesn't matter anymore. George said, go. Your plane's about to take off. George, this time, I really. Have a safe trip. George cut her off and hung up. Standing outside the hotel, he lit another cigarette. In truth, he had quit smoking 3 years ago, but tonight, he desperately wanted one. Halfway through the cigarette, his phone rang again. This time it was a text message. Still Sophia. It read, George, I'm sorry, but Makoto really needs me. Just 2 years. I swear this time I'll keep my promise. Wait for me. Okay. George stared at the screen for a long time. Then he extinguished the cigarette and typed a reply. 3 words. I'm not waiting. Send. The moment the message went through, he felt something inside him snap. Not shatter. Snap. Like a string stretched too tightly for too long. Finally breaking. He put away his phone, straightened his suit, and turned around to walk back into the hotel. The young receptionist looked at him with eyes full of sympathy. George smiled at her. Could you bring me the bill? Mr. Wong. Regarding Miss Kim's expenses, I'll pay. George pulled out his card. All of it, including the drinks she ordered. After swiping his card and signing the receipt, he glanced at the final total. 188,888. A pretty lucky number. He smiled faintly, folded the receipt in half, and slipped it into his pocket. When he stepped out of the hotel again, the night wind had grown stronger. George didn't call a taxi. Instead, he walked slowly down the street. The wind puffed up his suit jacket, but he couldn't be bothered to care. Eventually, he reached an intersection. Red light. He stopped and looked across the street. The light turned green, then red again, then green. He didn't move. He simply stood there for nearly 10 minutes until an impatient driver behind him started honking. Only then did George snap out of it and step onto the crosswalk. As he reached the other side, his phone vibrated again. He pulled it out. It was a reply from Sophia. A very long message, but he only noticed the last sentence. George, you're going to regret this. George stared at those words for a long time. Then he locked the screen and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He kept walking. The streetlight stretched his shadow longer and longer, so long that it felt like the past 7 years. Regret it? George let out a cold laugh. He wasn't sure who he was speaking to. Maybe. Then he said, but if I don't try, how will I ever know? The night breeze carried the faint fragrance of flowers from some nearby florist. Spring was coming. George thought that wasn't such a bad thing. The night before Sophia was due to leave the country. At 11:30 p.m., someone knocked on the door of George's apartment. George was sitting on the floor assembling a Lego set, a space shuttle with more than 3,000 pieces. He had been working on it for 3 days and was only halfway finished. When the knock sounded, his hand twitched. Crash! The wing he had just completed collapsed into a pile of pieces. George stared at the scattered bricks for 3 seconds. Then he stood up and shuffled toward the door in his slippers. Sophia was standing outside. She wasn't wearing makeup. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her hair was tied into a loose low ponytail. She wore an oversized hoodie. George recognized it immediately. It was his. A birthday gift he had given her 3 years ago. Her voice was slightly hoarse. Still awake? Yeah. George stepped aside. Come in. Chapter 5. Sophia walked inside and stood by the entryway for a moment, looking around the apartment as though it were her first time there. Even though she had been there hundreds of times, the sofa, the coffee table, the TV stand, they were all still in the same places. Yet somehow, everything felt different. The place was cleaner. George's apartment used to be a little messy. Magazines piled up on the coffee table, clothes draped over the back of the sofa, the refrigerator covered with takeout menus. Now everything was neatly organized. The floor was polished enough to reflect people's shadows. You cleaned the place? Sophia asked. Had nothing better to do. George replied. Sit. Sophia sat down on the sofa. George went to the kitchen, poured her a glass of water, and placed it in front of her. Then he returned to the floor and resumed assembling the pile of broken Lego pieces. Neither of them spoke. The only sound in the living room was the soft clicking of Lego bricks snapping together. Click, click, slow and steady, like the ticking of a pendulum. Eventually, Sophia spoke first. My flight is tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. George nodded. I'm going to Melbourne. Makoto's cousin lives there. She can help arrange treatment at a hospital. I might be there for a while. The doctor said changing environments would be good for his condition. George pressed a white brick into place and finally looked up. How long is a while? Sophia avoided his gaze. 2 years. The doctor said at least 2 years. George nodded. He said nothing, just lowered his head and continued building. George. Sophia's voice grew even hoarser. I know I've let you down. On the day of the engagement party, I really didn't have a choice. Makoto was actually standing on the cliff. The police were already there. If I'd arrived 30 minutes later, he would've. I know. George interrupted. You've already told me. Sophia bit her lip. Then she pulled out a set of keys from her pocket and placed them on the coffee table. Clink. The metal struck the glass with a crisp sound. This. I'm giving it back. It was the key to George's apartment. He had given it to her 3 years ago. Back then, Sophia had said, it'll make it easier for me to visit you. And it really had become a habit. She came whenever she wanted, left whenever she wanted, as if it were her own home. George looked at the keychain. The little teddy bear charm Sophia loved was still attached. Its fur had long since been worn away. Just leave it there, he said. Sophia waited for a moment. Seeing that George made no move to take it, she continued. I promise this will be the last time. 2 years. Just 2 years. Once Makoto's condition stabilizes, I'll come back immediately. Then we can get married. George finished the sentence for her. Yes. Sophia nodded. For the first time, a spark appeared in her eyes. We'll get married. We'll have an even bigger wedding. We can hold it anywhere you want. You decide. I'll get a custom-made wedding dress. We'll book the best hotel. We'll invite everyone. Sophia. George interrupted her again. What? His expression remained completely blank. What if he's still not better in 2 years? Sophia froze. George set down the Lego piece in his hand and looked directly at her. I mean it. What if, 2 years from now, he still needs you? What if he's still threatening to jump off buildings, jump off bridges, or overdose on sleeping pills? What will you do then? Stay with him for another 2 years? And another 2 years after that? And another? No. Sophia shook her head hard. That's not going to happen. The doctor said this treatment plan is comprehensive. He'll definitely get better. And Makoto promised me. He said that if I stay with him for these 2 years, then afterward he'll definitely. George laughed. He raised an eyebrow. He promised. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh people made when they were too frustrated to be angry anymore. How many times has he promised before? The last time, before he tried jumping off a bridge, he said it was the final time. The time before that, when he swallowed those pills, he said he'd never do it again. The time before that, and the time before that. George began counting on his fingers. Which one of those promises actually meant anything? Chapter 6. Sophia fell silent. Her head lowered as her fingers twisted the drawstrings of her hoodie tighter and tighter until her fingertips turned white. George, she finally said after a long while, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you think I'm stupid? George didn't answer. Sophia lifted her head. Her eyes were red. I just can't bring myself to abandon him. Makoto lost his parents when he was young. He has nobody else. When we were in high school, he stood up to a group of thugs for me. The scar on his arm is still there. How can I just ignore him after that? The same explanation. George had heard it countless times. Sometimes he wanted to ask her. Yes, Makoto took a hit for you. That's true, but what about me? Do you remember anything I've done for you? In the middle of winter, at 3 in the morning, she once said she was craving soy milk and fried dough sticks from the south side of town. He had driven across half the city to get them. When her mother was hospitalized, he worked 3 consecutive night shifts while staying at the hospital with her. He had been so exhausted that he fell asleep on a bench in the corridor. When things weren't going well at work, he called in favors, arranged dinners, and drank with people until he ended up with stomach bleeding. Did she remember any of that? But he didn't ask. There was no point. Love wasn't bookkeeping. It wasn't a matter of calculating how much one person gave and how much the other owed in return. In the end, George simply said, I don't think you're stupid. You just did what you believed was right. Sophia looked at him. At last, her tears began to fall. Then, her voice broke with sobs. Then will you wait for me? Just 2 years. Wait for me. Okay. George didn't answer immediately. He stood up and walked to the window. Outside stretched the city's nightscape. Thousands of lights glowed in the darkness. Behind every light was a different story. Some families were reuniting. Some couples were arguing. Some people were falling in love. Some were saying goodbye. Sophia, he said while looking out the window, his back facing her. I've waited for you many times in my life. On rainy days, you'd tell me to wait 10 minutes. I'd wait an hour. On my birthday, you'd say traffic was bad and ask me to wait a little longer. I waited from 6 until 9. The candles on the cake burned all the way down. On the day my father had surgery, you said you'd come back soon. I waited from sunrise until nightfall. You never came. Then he turned around and looked at her. I can wait. His voice was calm. I'm just no longer able to afford waiting. Sophia's tears fell even harder. Yet she made no sound. She simply stared at George, as if she were looking at a stranger. George walked back to the coffee table and picked up the keychain. The cold metal pressed against his palm. I'll keep the key. You should go. George, have a safe trip. He said those words softly, calmly, as casually as if he were commenting on the weather. Sophia stood up. She walked to the door. Her hand rested on the doorknob. Then she stopped, turning around. She gave George one last look. George stood in the middle of the living room. The keychain was clenched in his hand. Behind him sat the half-finished Lego space shuttle, and a room full of silence. George, she said, I love you. George nodded. Biting her lip. Sophia said, I really do love you. I know. George's voice was steady. The door opened, then closed. Click. The sound was light, very light. Yet to George, it felt louder than anything else. He stood there for a long time. Then he walked to the sofa and sat down, staring at the keychain in his hand. The little teddy bear charm was grinning happily, completely carefree. George looked at it for a long while, then suddenly stood up and walked onto the balcony. He raised his hand, intending to throw the keys over the railing. 12 floors up. If he tossed them, they'd be gone forever. But halfway through the motion, he stopped. In the end, he didn't throw them away. Instead, he returned inside and opened the bottom drawer of the TV cabinet. Inside was a small metal box. It held all the little things he had never been able to throw away over the years. He placed the keychain inside, alongside old movie ticket stubs, amusement park tickets, and the little notes she had written to him. Then he closed the lid, pushed the box back into the drawer, and shut it. After that, he sat back down on the floor, picked up the scattered Lego pieces, and continued building the space shuttle. Chapter 7. The space shuttle's wing had fallen apart, so it had to be rebuilt. George searched for each piece one by one, matched them one by one, and patiently put everything back together. By 3 in the morning, he finally finished. He stood up and took 2 steps back to admire it. The space shuttle, made of more than 3,000 pieces, stood proudly on the coffee table, looking as if it could blast off at any moment. George stared at it for a long time. Then he took out his phone and snapped a picture. He posted it online. No caption, just the photo. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. The first like came from his friend David. The comment read, "Holy crap, that's insane, bro. You actually managed to build that thing." Then came likes from coworkers, relatives, friends. Not Sophia. She was probably already on the plane. Or maybe it hadn't taken off yet. Either way, she was probably too busy to scroll through social media. She had to take care of Makoto, had to comfort him, had to think about what to do after they landed. George put his phone down and went to the kitchen to make a bowl of instant noodles. He added an egg and 2 sausages. The steaming bowl was carried back to the coffee table. He ate it while looking at the space shuttle. Halfway through, He suddenly laughed. At himself. Someone else was probably eating first-class airline meals right now. Red wine. Steak. Meanwhile, he was sitting here eating instant noodles. Braised beef flavor. No less. But honestly, they smelled amazing. He finished every bite. Even drank all the soup. Afterward, he washed the dishes, took a shower, and climbed into bed. Before closing his eyes, he checked his phone one last time. 4:10 in the morning. Sophia's flight had already been in the air for 2 hours. He tapped on her profile picture. Her social media cover photo was still a picture of the two of them at an amusement park. She was smiling sweetly. Her status message hadn't changed. May I win one person's heart and never be separated until old age. George looked at it for a while, then exited. He opened the settings, found the friend permissions, selected, don't let her see my posts. Then he selected, don't see hers either. After that, he tossed the phone aside and turned off the light. In the darkness, he lay awake staring at the ceiling. There really wasn't much left to think about. He had already thought through everything, already grieved everything there was to grieve. Now he was simply tired, so tired that even his bones seemed to ache, but he knew he had made it through. That hurdle was behind him now. The crossing hadn't been graceful. He had stumbled, crawled, and dragged himself across it, but he had crossed it all the same. Outside the window, the sky slowly began to brighten. Dawn was coming. George rolled over and closed his eyes. Just before drifting off to sleep, he vaguely thought, I should go to the supermarket tomorrow. The fridge is empty, and that pothose plant needs watering. The space shuttle looks pretty good there, though I should dust it. Small things, one at a time. Things would get better, eventually. Time was a funny thing. When you stared directly at it, it crawled along like an old woman leaning on a cane, taking forever to move. But the moment you stopped paying attention, it sprinted away faster than anyone else. George had finally learned that lesson. Right after Sophia left, time had moved painfully slowly. Every day felt like 2. Every hour felt like a century. He tried all sorts of ways to pass the time. He built Lego sets, 3 of them, from a space shuttle to the Taj Mahal. Eventually, just looking at plastic bricks gave him a headache. He learned to cook, starting with scrambled eggs and tomatoes, then moving on to braised pork. His cooking never improved much. His weight, however, went up by 5 pounds. He even signed up for guitar lessons. After 2 months, the only song he could play was Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. His teacher refunded half the tuition and told him, Buddy, I think your fingers have a personal grudge against guitar strings. Eventually, George gave up trying so hard. He went to work, came home from work, ate when it was time to eat, slept when it was time to sleep. His days became like products rolling off an assembly line, all made from the same mold, monotonous, but peaceful. Chapter 8. A year passed just like that. One morning, exactly a year later, George was brushing his teeth when he noticed a few gray hairs at his temples in the mirror. He stared at them for a long time. Then he laughed. Laughed at how stupid he used to be. Staying up late for someone who didn't love him. Losing sleep. Losing hair. Meanwhile, she was in Australia looking at kangaroos while he was at home staring at the ceiling. If that wasn't stupid, what was? After that day, George gave his apartment a thorough cleaning. Everything Sophia had left behind, her slippers, water cup, pillow, half-used lipstick, and an unfinished box of face masks, went into a cardboard box, then into the dumpster downstairs. It wasn't out of hatred. The stuff just took up space, and looking at it was annoying. When he finished cleaning, the apartment felt half as crowded, and twice as bright. Not bad. 3 months later, George's company landed a new project. They were partnering with a floral design studio. George was assigned to coordinate with them. That's how he met the studio's owner, Willow. The first time they met was at her workshop. The place was overflowing with flowers. The fragrance was so strong it nearly made him sneeze. Willow looked up from behind a mountain of bouquets. A leaf was stuck to her cheek. She was holding a pair of pruning scissors. Just a second, she said. Let me finish wrapping this bouquet. Her voice was bright and clear. George stood there waiting, watching her hands move gracefully as she arranged flowers and greenery into place. Sunlight streamed through the window and settled on her hair, creating a soft halo around her. All done. Willow held up the bouquet. This is for a client. What do you think? George didn't know the first thing about flowers. All he knew was that it looked beautiful. White, pink, purple, all clustered together in cheerful harmony. It's beautiful, he said. Willow laughed immediately. Her eyes curved into crescents. That's the kind of review an elementary school kid would write. Like, the weather is nice today, and the flowers are very pretty. George laughed too. The project went smoothly after that, and it turned out better than anyone expected. At the celebration dinner, George's co-workers teased him into raising a toast to Willow. Teacher Willow's floral designs added so much to the proposal. Someone shouted. George walked over with a glass of wine. Willow was eating cake. A dab of cream sat at the corner of her mouth. To you, George said, lifting his glass. And to you. Willow clinked glasses with him, then lowered her voice. Honestly, half of that floral design concept came from you. Don't think I didn't notice. George blinked. Willow winked. I read all those ideas you put in your emails. You've got pretty good taste. Manager Wong. It was the first time George realized that being seen through wasn't always a bad thing. After that, they started meeting outside of work. Not to discuss projects, just to chat. They talked about movies they had recently watched, restaurants they liked, the ginkgo tree at the corner whose leaves had finally turned yellow. Small things, nothing important. Yet George found himself enjoying every conversation. One day, the topic drifted to exes. George briefly mentioned Sophia. After listening, Willow neither comforted him nor criticized Sophia. She simply said, "Oh, you were incredibly patient." George asked, "What about you?" Willow thought for a moment. Me. I probably would have flipped the table the first time. Why should I put up with that? I don't owe anybody anything. George laughed, and after laughing, he found himself thinking the same thing. Yeah, why should he? But understanding something and actually moving on from it were two different things. That final step still took time. Chapter 9. It was Willow who made the first move. That day, George's father was undergoing a second surgery. It wasn't considered a major operation, but anything involving the heart was enough to make the whole family anxious. George stayed at the hospital the entire time. For 3 days, he barely slept. On the afternoon of the third day, the surgery was finally over. It was a success. George let out a long breath of relief. Only then did he realize how exhausted he was. He was so tired he felt like he could fall asleep standing up. He went downstairs to the small garden outside the hospital to get some fresh air. There, he spotted Willow sitting on a bench. A thermos container rested by her feet. "How did you get here?" George stopped in surprise. "I heard about it from one of your co-workers." Willow stood up and handed him the thermos. "Chicken soup. I made it myself." She grinned. "Don't worry, it's not poisoned." George took it from her. The container was still warm. "How long have you been waiting?" Willow glanced at the time on her phone. "Not that long. About 2 hours." She shrugged. "I thought about bringing it upstairs, but I wasn't sure if it would be convenient. So I figured I'd wait here. Sooner or later I'd run into you." George looked at the thermos, then at her. There were faint dark circles under her eyes too. She probably hadn't been sleeping well either. "Thank you," he said. "What are you thanking me for?" Willow waved him off. "Go upstairs already. Your dad should be waking up soon." George nodded. He turned to leave, then stopped. "Willow." "Yeah?" George asked. "Are you free this weekend? I'd like to take you out for dinner." Willow stared at him for several seconds. Then she smiled. "Sure, but don't take me somewhere too expensive. My appetite's tiny. You'll lose money." And just like that, they slowly ended up together. Nothing dramatic, nothing earth-shattering, just a relationship that grew little by little. One day they would have dinner together. The next day they would watch a movie. When Willow opened a new flower shop, George helped carry flower pots until he was drenched in sweat. When George worked overtime, Willow would bring him late-night snacks and sit there until he finished eating. One time, George caught a bad cold. His fever climbed to 39 degrees. Willow took time off work to take care of him. She fed him medicine, changed his cold towels, cooked porridge, bustled around all day looking after him. Half conscious from the fever, George grabbed her hand and murmured, "Don't go." Willow squeezed his hand. "I won't." And just like that, he fell asleep. A deep, peaceful sleep. When he woke up, it was already dark outside. Willow had fallen asleep beside the bed. A towel was still clutched in her hand. George stared at her sleeping profile for a long time. Then he thought, "It's her." The proposal came a year later. There was no grand romantic setup, no candlelit rooftop, no luxury restaurant, just at home. George cooked dinner. After they finished eating and were washing dishes together, he casually said, "So, how about we get married?" Willow was drying a plate. Her hand paused. "You've thought it through?" "I have." George nodded. "I've been thinking about it for a long time." Willow set down the plate and turned to face him. "No regrets?" "No regrets." A smile appeared on Willow's lips. "Then I won't regret it either." And that was that. The wedding was simple. Only family members and a few close friends attended. Willow wore a plain white dress. No elaborate wedding gown, just a delicate veil. George wore a suit. His palms were sweating from nervousness. The officiant smiled and asked, "Miss Willow, do you take Mr. George to be your husband?" "I do." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was crystal clear. George listened, and suddenly his eyes turned red. Chapter 10. Life after marriage wasn't all that different from life before marriage. The only real difference was the little red marriage certificate. Willow still ran her flower shop. George still worked at his company. On weekends, they went grocery shopping together, cooked together, and cleaned the house together. At night, they would curl up on the couch to watch TV and often fall asleep halfway through. It was ordinary, but it was steady. Sometimes George would think that this was probably what life was supposed to be. It didn't need to be dramatic. It was simply waking up with someone beside you, coming home to a light left on for you, having someone bring you an umbrella when it rained, having someone remind you to put on a jacket when it got cold. That was enough. On the second anniversary of their wedding, George left work early and went to Willow's flower shop. The shop was called The Sound of Waves Remains, a rather poetic name. Willow said her mother had chosen it because she loved the old song. When George pushed open the door, the wind chime jingled softly. Willow was in the back room arranging flowers. She poked her head out when she saw him and smiled. "You're early." "Yeah." George smiled back. "I came to pick you up. What do you want for dinner tonight?" "Anything," Willow answered casually. "You decide." Then she disappeared back into the workroom. "Give me a minute. I'm almost done with this bouquet." George wandered around the shop while waiting. The place was filled with flowers. The fragrance lingered everywhere. He stopped in front of a display of roses. Red, pink, white, yellow, and champagne-colored roses in soft, elegant shades. Champagne roses were Willow's favorite. Thinking of that, George reached out and picked one up. Just as he pulled it free, the wind chime above the door rang again. George turned around and automatically said, "Welcome." Then he froze. Standing in the doorway was Sophia. She had lost weight. Her skin was darker than before. Her hair was cut short. She wore a beige trench coat and dragged a suitcase behind her. The moment she saw George, her eyes widened, as if she had seen a ghost. The two of them stared at each other. Neither spoke. The air seemed frozen. Only the wind chime continued ringing cheerfully, completely unaware of the tension. Eventually, Sophia spoke first. Her voice sounded dry. "George?" "Yeah." George still held the rose in his hand. How are you here?" "Buying flowers." Sophia's gaze dropped to the rose, then to his face, then back to the rose, again and again, as if she were trying to confirm something. "Who are the flowers for?" Her voice trembled slightly. Before George could answer, Willow emerged from the back room carrying a bouquet of lilies. "Honey, what do you think of this bouquet?" She stopped halfway through the sentence. Her eyes moved from George to Sophia. George walked over naturally, took the bouquet from Willow's hands, and then handed her the champagne rose. "This matches your dress today." Willow was wearing a light apricot-colored dress. It really did match. She accepted the rose with a smile. "You've gotten pretty good at this." Then she turned towards Sophia and politely nodded. "Hello, are you looking to buy flowers?" Sophia didn't answer. She simply stared at Willow, then at George, then at Willow's hand wrapped around George's arm. The color gradually drained from her face, until she looked pale as paper. Willow quietly asked, "Who is she?" "Sophia." George's voice remained calm. "A friend from the past." "Oh." Willow nodded, then smiled politely at Sophia. "Hello, I'm Willow, George's wife." "Wife?" Sophia repeated the word, as though she didn't understand what it meant. George looked at her. "Yes, my wife." His tone remained steady. "We've been married for 2 years. Chapter 11. The wind chime rang again. This time, a young man walked in. He was dressed fashionably, his hair styled to perfection. As he entered, he called out, "Sophia, is this shop any good? Do they even have white rose?" He stopped halfway through the sentence, because he had seen George, and froze. 4 people, 8 eyes, looking at one another. The flower shop fell so silent that the traffic outside could be heard. In the end, George was the first to move. He handed the bouquet to Willow, then naturally wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Looking at Sophia, he said, "Take your time browsing. We'll get going." As they reached the door, Sophia suddenly called out, "George." George stopped, but didn't turn around. Sophia's voice trembled. "You really got married?" Only then did George turn around. He looked at her for 2 seconds, then he raised his left hand. The wedding band on his ring finger caught the light with a faint gleam. "Yeah." His voice was calm, as real as it gets. Then he pushed open the door and walked out with Willow in his arms. The moment the door closed behind them, he heard something shatter inside. Maybe a vase, maybe something else. He didn't turn around to check. Outside the shop, the evening breeze carried a hint of coolness. Willow tightened her grip around his arm. "You okay?" "I'm fine." George smiled. What could possibly be wrong? Willow hesitated. "So, that was your ex?" "Yeah." "And the guy beside her?" George replied. "Her childhood sweetheart, the bridge jumping, building climbing, pill swallowing suicide specialist." Willow burst out laughing, then quickly covered her mouth. "You're awful." George laughed too and shrugged. "I'm just telling the truth." No one has more professional experience in that field than he does. As they laughed, George suddenly stopped walking. Then he turned and looked at Willow. The setting sun painted her face with a soft golden glow. She held the bouquet of lilies and the champagne rose in her arms. Her bright eyes looked back at him. What? Willow blinked. George shook his head, then leaned over and kissed her forehead. Nothing. He smiled. I just think the weather is really nice today, and the flowers are beautiful. Willow froze for a second. Then she burst into laughter. Her eyes curved into crescents. There you go again. Hand in hand, they continued down the street. Their shadows stretched long across the pavement, pressed close together, as if they could never be separated. Only after they had walked far away did George glance back one last time. The sign for the sound of waves remains glowed softly in the dusk, a warm, gentle light. He watched it for a moment, then turned away, and tightened his grip on Willow's hand. Come on, he said. Let's go home and eat. What do you want? Anything you cook. Willow thought for a moment. How about tomato and egg noodles? Sounds good. Extra scallions. The setting sun stretched their shadows farther and farther, until both disappeared around the corner. Back inside the flower shop, Sophia remained standing exactly where she was, motionless. At her feet lay the shattered remains of a vase. Water and flowers were scattered across the floor, like someone's tears. Makoto stood beside her. His expression wasn't much better. He stared toward the doorway for a long time before scoffing. What's he showing off for? So what if he's married? Who does he think he's impressing? Shut up. Sophia's voice was quiet, but icy cold. Makoto jumped and turned toward her. Slowly, Sophia crouched down and picked up a shard of broken porcelain. The edge was sharp. It sliced her finger open. A bead of blood appeared, yet she seemed not to feel it at all. She simply stared at the shard, for a very long time. Then she looked up, toward the window. Outside, George and Willow were already gone. Not even their shadows remained. Only the falling dusk, and the city lights beginning to glow. The city was still the same city, but some things were gone forever. Chapter 12. After that night at the flower shop, George's life didn't experience any major upheavals. He went to work, came home from work, and lived his life as usual. Willow remained busy at the flower shop every day. Whenever she came home, she carried the scent of flowers with her. Sometimes roses, sometimes lilies, sometimes some kind of greenery George couldn't even name. One day, he asked her, back at the flower shop that day, were you really not bothered at all? Willow was arranging flowers. Without even looking up, she asked, bothered by what? Sophia. Willow set down her scissors and turned to look at him. Her expression was unusually serious. Do you want the honest answer or the polite answer? The honest one. The honest answer. Willow nodded. A little, but not because she's your ex. George raised an eyebrow. Then why? Willow thought for a moment. Because of the way she looked at you. What kind of look? Willow searched for the right words. Like someone who lost something and suddenly found it again. George didn't respond. Willow walked over and sat beside him. Naturally, she rested her head on his shoulder. But then I thought about it. If something's been lost, it's been lost. Even if you find it again, it isn't the same thing anymore, don't you think? George wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Yeah, so, Willow said, smiling. I'm not worried. You belong to me now. It doesn't matter how much someone else looks. It sounded a little possessive, but hearing it made George's heart feel warm. He thought the matter was finally over. He was wrong. 3 days later, Sophia Kim showed up. At his company, George was in the middle of a meeting when the receptionist called his extension. Manager Wong, there's a Miss Kim here to see you. She says it's urgent. George's hand paused. Tell her I'm in a meeting. I did. The receptionist sounded helpless, but she refuses to leave. She says she'll wait until you're done. George hung up and continued the meeting, but his attention drifted more than once. By the time the meeting ended, an hour had passed. When he walked out of the conference room, he saw Sophia sitting in the waiting area. Just as expected, she was wearing a black dress. It made her face appear even paler. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept properly in days. The moment she saw George, she stood up too quickly. Bang! Her knee struck the coffee table. George! She called his name. What is it? George didn't walk over. He stayed where he was. Can we talk? Just for a little while. Her voice was quiet, almost pleading. George glanced at his watch. 10 minutes. Downstairs cafe. The cafe wasn't crowded. They found a table in the corner. George ordered an Americano. Sophia ordered a latte, but she never took a sip. She simply wrapped both hands around the cup as if trying to warm herself. Go ahead. George got straight to the point. Sophia lifted her head. Her eyes were swollen and red, as though she had been crying for a long time. I saw your wedding video. Her voice was hoarse. David posted it. David was George's best friend. He had been the best man at the wedding. He had indeed posted plenty of videos and photos afterward. George nodded. Yeah. Sophia sniffled. Why? What do you mean, why? She stared at him. Why Willow? Why her? Her eyes locked onto his. You've only known each other for what? 2 years. We were together for 7 years. 7 years. George, why were you able to? George finished the sentence for her. Get married? Sophia bit her lip, then nodded. Chapter 13. George took a sip of his coffee. Bitter. He set the cup down and looked at Sophia. I've only known Willow for 2 years, he said. But I've known you for 7. I waited for you for 7 years. Sophia. Sometimes the length of time doesn't mean anything. But you said you'd wait for me. I did say that. George cut her off. But I never said I'd wait forever. Tears started falling from Sophia's eyes again, one drop after another splashing into her coffee. Crying, she said. I know I let you down, but I really had no choice back then. Makoto. George suddenly asked. How was Makoto? Sophia froze. George leaned forward slightly and looked straight into her eyes. I mean, he said, was Makoto really sick? What do you mean? George spread his hands. I mean exactly what I said. Depression, anxiety, needing someone to watch him 24 hours a day or he'd kill himself. Was he really that sick? Sophia's expression changed. George, what are you saying? Are you accusing me of lying? George shook his head. I'm not doubting you, I'm doubting him. He pulled out his phone, opened a video, and slid it across the table to her. The footage was from a surveillance camera. It was a little blurry, but the faces were still recognizable. It was nighttime by the sea. Someone was sitting alone on the edge of a cliff, looking lonely from behind. A few friends then walked over carrying a barbecue grill and cases of beer. The moment they arrived, the person jumped to his feet, grinning as he helped set everything up. His movements were quick and energetic. That person was Makoto. In the upper right corner was the timestamp. 2 years ago, the night of the engagement banquet, 11:47 p.m. Sophia's eyes widened. This is. George's tone remained calm. After you left the engagement banquet that night, I went to the beach, not to find you. I just wanted to confirm something. Then I saw this. Sophia stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Impossible. She shook her head. This video is fake. Makoto was clearly. George finished the sentence for her. Clearly jumping off a cliff. He laughed, a trace of mockery in his smile. Sophia, look carefully. This was less than 2 hours after you left. It takes 40 minutes to get from the hotel to the airport, and another 3-hour flight to get there. Even if you traveled by rocket, there was no way you could have reached his side within 2 hours. He paused. So what was he doing during that time? Sitting on the cliff enjoying the ocean breeze while waiting for you. Sophia said nothing. She simply stared at the phone as if she wanted to burn a hole through the screen. George took the phone back and opened another file. It was a photograph, a medical report. The entire document was in English, but the general meaning was easy enough to understand. Under the diagnosis section, it didn't say depression. Instead, it read, histrionic personality disorder and dependent personality disorder. The recommended treatment was psychological counseling, not medication. George said. This is the diagnostic report issued by Makoto's psychologist in Australia. I had a friend help me get it. Yes, it's an invasion of privacy, and I apologize for that, but I think you should see it. Sophia took the phone. Her finger slowly scrolled through the document. The more she read, the harder her hands shook. And there's this too. George sent her another screenshot. Chapter 14. It was Makoto's Instagram account, a private account, but he had forgotten to block one mutual friend. The screenshots showed photos of Makoto at parties, drinking by a pool, having barbecues on the beach, smiling brightly under the sun. The timestamps showed they were taken 6 months ago, the exact same period when Sophia had been posting updates saying, accompanying Makoto through treatment. Hope he gets better soon. George spoke slowly, one word at a time. During all that time, he wasn't getting treatment. He was on vacation, living in the apartment you rented for him, spending your money, posting photos of you taking care of him, while having the time of his life. Sophia had stopped crying. She just sat there, staring blankly at the phone as though her soul had left her body. After a long time, she finally spoke. Her voice was as light as a feather. When did you find all this out? George replied. Bit by bit over the past year. At first, a friend told me he'd seen Makoto partying at a bar. I didn't believe it, so I looked into it myself. Then the more I investigated, the more I found. Sophia lifted her head. Her eyes were so red they looked frightening. Then why didn't you tell me? You knew he was lying to me. Why didn't you tell me? George looked at her for a long time. Then he smiled. Even if I had told you, would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was framing him, trying to drive a wedge between you two, making up lies because I was jealous? Sophia opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out, because she knew he was right. If this had been 2 years ago, if George had shown her all this evidence back then, would she have believed him? No. She would have thought he was talking nonsense, that he was slandering Makoto, that he didn't understand the bond they had forged through hardship. You see, George said, you already know the answer yourself. Sophia lowered her head. Her shoulders began to tremble. At first, only slightly, then more and more violently. She was crying, but not a sound came out. Tears streamed silently down her face. George continued. So I gave up. Not on you. I gave up on trying to wake someone who was pretending to sleep. Sophia, you chose to believe him. You chose to stay by his side. You chose to abandon me again and again for his sake. That was your choice. I respected your choice, so I stepped away. Sophia suddenly looked up and stared at George. What about Willow? What is she to you? A replacement? Did you just marry some random woman to get back at me? The expression on George's face gradually turned cold. Sophia, he said, that is the most insulting thing you've said all day. Sophia froze. Willow is nobody's replacement. George spoke slowly and firmly, emphasizing every word. She is my wife, the person I chose for myself. When my father went through his second surgery, I stayed at the hospital for 3 days and 3 nights. She was there too. She never even told me she was coming. She came on her own and waited downstairs for 2 hours just to bring me a pot of chicken soup. Do you know what those 3 days were like for me? I was terrified my father wouldn't wake up, terrified the surgery would go wrong, terrified of everything. She showed up, said nothing, and simply handed me that pot of soup. I drank it, and somehow it felt like even if the sky collapsed, it wouldn't be so scary anymore. Sophia's face grew paler and paler. And you, George said as he looked at her, spent those same 3 days helping Makoto with his so-called depression treatment. In Switzerland, taking sightseeing tours in a helicopter. The photos you posted looked pretty cheerful. Sophia's lips trembled. I didn't know your father was having surgery. You did. George's voice was calm. I told you. You said you'd come once you were done. Were you ever done? No. You went on a helicopter tour instead. Chapter 15. As he said those words, his tone remained calm. There was no blame, no anger. It was as if he were simply stating a fact. Yet it was precisely that calmness that made Sophia's heart sink little by little. George said. So you see, it wasn't Willow who replaced you. You were the one who gave up on me. Every time you chose Makoto, every time you put me second, every time you assumed I'd wait forever, you had already given me up. Sophia shook her head. I didn't. She wanted to argue, but the words died in her throat, because she knew there was no point. The truth was right there, like a mirror reflecting all her selfishness and foolishness. George, she finally said, her voice barely audible. If I've finally woken up now, if I truly understand everything, do I still have a chance? George didn't answer immediately. He picked up his coffee and took a sip. It had already gone cold, and it tasted even more bitter. Then he set the cup down and looked at Sophia. For a long time. So long that Sophia thought he wasn't going to answer. No, George said. The word was soft, but absolute. The light in Sophia's eyes faded instantly. Why? She asked, unwilling to give up completely. George replied. Because I'm married. Because I have a wife. Because she was there when I needed someone the most. And you weren't. Because with her, I'm the first choice. Not the backup plan. He stood up and took some cash from his wallet, placing it on the table. Coffee's on me, he said. Don't come looking for me again. You live your life. I'll live mine. We don't owe each other anything anymore. That's for the best. With that, he turned to leave. George. Sophia called after him. George stopped walking but didn't turn around. Do you love her? Sophia asked, her voice thick with tears. George was silent for a moment. Then he answered. I do. Sophia asked. Do you love her more than you loved me? This time, George smiled. A faint, gentle smile. Sophia, he said, that question doesn't matter anymore. He pushed open the door and walked out. The sunlight outside was bright, almost painful to look at. Standing beneath it, George took a deep breath and slowly let it out. The heavy stone that had weighed on his heart for the past 2 years seemed to have finally shattered, dissolved, gone. He pulled out his phone and sent Willow a message. What do you want for dinner tonight? I'll stop by the supermarket. Willow replied almost immediately. I want the braised pork you make. Deal. A moment later, another message popped up. Go easy on the sugar. I've gained weight lately. You haven't. You're just right. Such a smooth talker. George looked at the screen and smiled. Then he put away his phone and headed toward the supermarket. After a few steps, he stopped and glanced back at the cafe. Through the glass window, he could still see Sophia sitting there, head lowered, shoulders trembling, crying. George watched for 2 seconds. Then he turned away and kept walking. Some tears have to be shed on your own. Some roads have to be walked on your own. Some lessons have to be learned on your own. No matter how much others say, it won't help. He walked into the supermarket and bought vegetables, meat, and Willow's favorite snacks. While checking out, the young cashier smiled and said, "You seem to be in a really good mood today." George blinked. "Do I?" "You do. You've been smiling the whole time." George touched his face. She was right. He really had been smiling. Carrying the grocery bags, he left the supermarket. The setting sun stretched his shadow long across the ground. His phone rang again. It was Willow. "I forgot to mention, we're out of soy sauce. Don't forget to buy some." "Already did." "What about cooking wine?" "Bought that too. Green onions, ginger, and garlic." "Got them all." "Good. Then hurry home. I'm hungry." "Okay, I'll be there soon." Chapter 16. After hanging up, George quickened his pace. As he walked, he suddenly remembered something. He pulled out his phone, found Sophia's contact on WeChat, opened it, and deleted it. Then he put his phone away, hummed a tune, and headed home. The setting sun stretched his shadow long across the ground. But this time, the shadow was no longer lonely, because someone was waiting for him at home. There was a light on. There was the smell of braised pork. There was a future. On the day of their second wedding anniversary, George took the day off. Willow closed her flower shop as well, hanging a sign on the door. Owners celebrating a special occasion. Closed for the day. They didn't have anything particularly special planned. They simply spent the day enjoying each other's company at home. They slept in until they woke naturally. George made breakfast. The fried eggs were a little burnt. The bacon was slightly overcooked, but Willow said it was delicious and finished every bite. After breakfast, they curled up on the couch and watched a movie together. It was an old one, Love Actually. Halfway through the movie, Willow suddenly said, "Honey, there's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" George's eyes remained fixed on the screen. Willow spoke softly, "I think I'm pregnant." The potato chip in George's hand fell to the floor. He turned to look at Willow for a full 10 seconds. Then he carefully asked, "You think?" Willow nodded, her cheeks turning slightly red. "I've taken 2 tests. Both came back positive, but I haven't gone to the hospital to confirm it yet. I wanted to tell you today." Before she could finish, George wrapped his arms around her and hugged her tightly, so tightly she nearly couldn't breathe. "Careful." Willow slapped his arm. George immediately loosened his grip, but his hands remained on her shoulders. His eyes were shining. "Really? We're really having a baby?" Willow smiled. "Probably, but we'll need a doctor to confirm it. Let's go. Right now." George jumped to his feet and started looking for clothes to change into. "What are you rushing for?" Willow pulled him back down onto the couch. "It's our anniversary. We can go tomorrow. Besides, the hospital's probably closed already." Only then did George realize the time. He glanced at the clock. 3 in the afternoon. Rubbing his hands together, he sat back down, but he couldn't stay still. One moment he was gently touching Willow's stomach. The next he was grinning foolishly, like someone who had just won the lottery. Willow laughed at him. "It's only been 3 months. You can't feel anything yet." "I know." George rested his hand on her lower abdomen. "I just want to." His touch was incredibly gentle, as though he were handling something fragile. Willow leaned against his shoulder. The two of them sat there quietly. Neither spoke. Warm sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating tiny particles of dust that sparkled in the air. The movie was still playing, but neither of them was watching anymore. After a long while, George said, "Honey, what is it?" "Thank you." "For what?" "Thank you for marrying me." George's voice was slightly hoarse. "Thank you for giving me a home. And now, thank you for giving me a child, too." Willow looked up at him. Her eyes had become a little misty. "You idiot." "I am." George nodded. "A happy idiot." The two of them stayed wrapped in each other's arms until the sun began to set. That evening, George cooked a feast. Every dish was one of Willow's favorites. Braised pork, sweet and sour spare ribs, steamed fish, and a pot of soup. Willow said there was no way she could eat that much. George replied, "You're eating for 2 now. You need the extra nutrition." In the end, Willow barely ate much. George was the one who ended up overeating. After dinner, George washed the dishes while Willow sat on a small stool by the kitchen doorway watching him. The sound of running water mixed with the clinking of plates and bowls. It was like a symphony of everyday life. "Honey," Willow suddenly called. "Do you think it'll be a boy or a girl?" Without turning around, George replied, "Either is fine. If it's a boy and takes after me, great. If it's a girl and takes after you, that's great too. What about names?" "We've got time. We can think about it slowly. If it's a boy, let's call him Noah. It symbolizes peace and safety." "Sounds good." "And if it's a girl, Serena. It means serenity and peace." George smiled and nodded. "Perfect." Chapter 17. Willow smiled and said, "My mom always says that daughters who take after their mothers are blessed." George wiped his hands, walked over, and crouched down in front of her. Looking into her eyes, he said, "Then if she takes after you, She'll be the luckiest girl in the world. Willow blushed and pushed him lightly. You and your sweet talk. George laughed, but as he laughed, his eyes grew a little warm. This is nice, he thought. Life is really nice. At 8 that evening, the doorbell rang. George was cutting fruit for Willow. He had diced an apple into small pieces and stuck toothpicks into them. Hearing the doorbell, he wiped his hands. Who's coming over this late? Maybe a delivery. Willow said. I ordered some maternity clothes. They should be arriving today. George went to answer the door. Standing outside was Sophia. She was dressed lightly for the weather, wearing only a thin sweater and a pair of jeans. Her hair was messy. There were tear stains on her face. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She carried a heavy-looking bag in one hand, and she reeked of alcohol. George frowned. Why are you here? Sophia looked at him for a few seconds. Then she smiled, a bitter smile. Aren't you going to invite me in? It's not very convenient. George said. My wife is home. The word wife came naturally to him. Sophia's smile stiffened for a moment before she forced it back. Just for a little while. I'll say a few things and leave. George hesitated. Then he glanced back into the house. Willow had already stood up from the couch and was looking toward the doorway. Who is it? She asked. Sophia. George replied. Willow walked over and stood beside him. She looked at Sophia, then at George. It's cold outside, she said. Come in. Sophia stepped inside. She remained standing in the entryway instead of walking farther in. Silently, she looked around the house. The living room wasn't large, but it felt warm and inviting. 2 throw pillows lay casually on the couch. A fruit platter sat on the coffee table. Their wedding photo hung on the wall. In the picture, George and Willow were grinning so widely their eyes were nearly closed. The dining table still held the remains of dinner. 3 dishes and a soup. Everything looked delicious. Laundry swayed gently on the balcony. A man's shirt hung beside a woman's dress. This was a home. A real home. Warm. Lived in. Full of life. As Sophia looked around, her eyes reddened again. Willow poured her a glass of water. Have a seat. Sophia sat down on the couch. Her hands trembled around the cup. George sat in a nearby armchair. Willow perched casually on the armrest beside him, her hand naturally resting on his shoulder. The 3 of them sat in silence. No one spoke first. Finally, Sophia broke it. I met Makoto's other girlfriends. Her voice was painfully hoarse. 3 of them at the same time. 1 in Melbourne, 1 in Sydney, and 1 back in China. He used my money to rent apartments in all 3 places and support 3 different women. George said nothing. Willow said nothing. Sophia laughed. It sounded worse than crying. He told me they were just friends. Support group friends. People helping each other through difficult times. I believed him. I really believed him. I even felt sorry for him. I thought he was sick and couldn't make any real friends. Her voice broke. Covering her face, she began trembling. George handed her a tissue. Sophia accepted it and wiped her face. But the more she wiped, the more tears came. I came here today, she said, sniffing back her tears, to tell you I'm sorry. George, I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry. George nodded. I accept your apology. And Sophia raised her head and looked at him. Her eyes were red and swollen. If I've finally woken up now, if I finally understand everything, do I still have a chance? Chapter 18. When she asked that question, her voice was very soft. It carried the last trace of hope, like a drowning person clutching at the final piece of driftwood. George looked at her for a long time. Then he said, Sophia, you weren't wrong. Sophia froze. You simply did what you believed was right. George continued, in your heart, Makoto was more important than I was. That was your choice. I respected your choice, so I stopped waiting. But I understand now, Sophia said. It's too late. George shook his head. I'm married now. I have a wife. And he paused and took Willow's hand. Her fingers were slender and soft. They fit perfectly in his. And I'm happy. George spoke slowly and sincerely. I don't want to change that, and I can't. Tears began falling from Sophia's eyes again. But this time, she made no sound. She simply cried silently as she looked at George, looked at Willow, looked at their intertwined hands. After a long while, she finally said, I understand. She stood up and picked up her bag. Sorry for disturbing you. I'll walk you out, George said, rising to his feet as well. No need. Sophia shook her head. I can leave on my own. She walked to the door. Her hand rested on the doorknob. Then she stopped, turning around. She took one final look at the house, one final look at George, one final look at Willow. Then she smiled, a faint, gentle smile. I wish you both happiness, she said, and I wish the same for you, George replied. Sophia nodded. She opened the door and walked out. The door closed softly behind her. George remained standing where he was, without moving. Willow walked over and wrapped her arms around him from behind. Resting her cheek against his back, she asked softly, Seeing her like that, does it hurt? No. George shook his head. It's just a little bittersweet. Bittersweet about what? About how people spend their lives missing things. George turned around and pulled her into his arms. But thankfully, I didn't miss you. Willow laughed against his chest. You really know how to sweet talk. I'm telling the truth. They held each other for a while. Then George suddenly said, Honey, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. Back at the flower shop, when Sophia and Makoto came in, you didn't seem surprised at all. George looked at her. Why? Willow lifted her head from his chest. Her eyes sparkled. Because I didn't need to be surprised. I knew you were my husband, and that was enough. George hesitated for a moment before asking, Did you know about Makoto? I mean, the fact that he was faking his illness. Willow didn't answer immediately. She released him and walked over to the couch. Then she sat down and patted the seat beside her. George walked over and sat down. Actually, Willow began softly. I know Makoto. George froze. What? When I was in college, I minored in psychology. Makoto was one of my professor's counseling clients. Of course, everything was anonymous, but I saw him a few times at the counseling center. George's eyes widened little by little. He already showed strong histrionic personality traits back then. Willow continued. He liked using extreme behavior to attract attention. My professor said people like him are very difficult to treat because they don't believe there's anything wrong with them. They enjoy being the center of attention, being cared for, being surrounded by people. George opened his mouth, but no words came out. After I graduated and opened the flower shop, I ran into him on the street once. He recognized me. He asked if I was the psychology student from back then. I said yes. Then he started complaining about how miserable he was and how desperately he needed help. I remember thinking at the time that he hadn't changed at all. He was still exactly the same. Then why? George's throat felt dry. Why didn't you tell me? Willow looked at him for a long time. Then she said, Because if I had told you, would you have believed me? Chapter 19. George froze. If I had told you 2 years ago that Makoto was faking it, would you have believed me? Willow asked. Or would you have thought I was trying to drive a wedge between people, slandering your ex-girlfriend and her childhood friend? George fell silent. The answer was obvious, so I said nothing. Willow took his hand. Because truly moving on is something you have to do yourself. You have to see the truth for yourself, understand it for yourself, and let go on your own. No matter how much other people say, it won't help. George squeezed her hand tightly. Then, you've known all along. Willow nodded. I knew what kind of person Makoto was. I knew what kind of person Sophia was. And I knew what kind of person you were. I knew you were waiting, enduring, giving yourself a deadline. So I waited too. I waited for you to truly let go. I waited for you to finally walk out of it. She paused and smiled. And now you have. George looked at her. For a long, long time. Then he pulled her into a tight embrace. Willow. His voice was muffled against her shoulder. How can someone be so? Willow laughed. So what? So good. George held her even tighter. So good that it scares me. Sometimes I'm afraid this is all a dream, that I'll wake up and it'll all be gone. It's not a dream. Willow gently patted his back. It's real. I'm real. Our baby is real. And this home is real. George loosened his embrace and looked at her eyes, her nose, her lips. Then he lowered his head and kissed her forehead. Thank you, he said. For what? Thank you for waiting for me. And thank you for letting me be worth the wait. Outside, the moon had risen. Round, bright. Moonlight streamed through the window and bathed the two of them in a glow as gentle as water. 1 year later, George and Willow's daughter was born. They named her Serena. On the day of her 1-month celebration banquet, many guests came. Relatives, friends, co-workers, former classmates. Several tables were filled with lively conversation and laughter. George held his daughter in his arms, grinning from ear to ear. Willow sat beside him. Though her complexion was still a little pale, her smile was soft and warm. David came as well. He refused to put Serena down, constantly saying, My goddaughter is so beautiful. Halfway through the banquet, David leaned toward George and lowered his voice. Hey, did you hear? Sophia went to teach in a rural community out west. George was placing food onto Willow's plate. His hand paused briefly. Really? Yeah, David nodded. She left last month. She posted some photos online. She looks darker and thinner now, but she seems genuinely happy. And she hasn't mentioned that jerk Makoto once. George nodded. Good for her. And Makoto? David curled his lip. I heard he hooked up with some rich older woman later on. Then her husband found out and beat the crap out of him. Now nobody knows where he ran off to. Serves him right. George didn't respond. He simply ladled another bowl of soup for Willow. Drink it while it's hot. Willow accepted it and sipped slowly. When she finished, she looked up and smiled at George. That smile was so gentle that it seemed capable of melting away every pain and regret of the past. George smiled back. Then he lowered his head and kissed Serena's tiny cheek. The little girl blinked her bright eyes and suddenly grabbed his finger. The entire table burst into laughter. George laughed too, as he looked at his wife, at his daughter, at the people he loved most. He finally understood something. Some people are lessons. Some people are destinations. And the luckiest thing in life is not meeting the right person at the perfect time. It's meeting the right person after you've finally learned how to cherish them. Chapter 20. After the banquet ended, the guests gradually left. After seeing the last of them off, George returned inside and found Willow holding Serena on the balcony, gazing at the moon. He walked over and wrapped his arms around both of them from behind. "Are you tired?" he asked. "No." Willow shook her head and gently nudged Serena into his arms. "Look, Serena is smiling." George lowered his head. Sure enough, the little girl was smiling. Her eyes curved like crescent moons. "She looks like you," George said. Willow poked him lightly. "And like you too." The two of them simply stood there holding their daughter and watching the moon. The evening breeze drifted in, carrying the fragrance of flowers. The lilies Willow had arranged in a vase earlier that day were blooming beautifully. "Honey," Willow suddenly called. Do you still think about her?" George knew exactly who she meant. He shook his head. "No, not at all. Not at all." George said. "Just like you said, some people and some things belong in the past once they're gone. Now I have you. I have Serena. And I have this family. That's enough." Willow leaned against his shoulder without saying anything. A long while passed before she finally whispered, "Me too." Under the moonlight, the shadows of the family of three stretched across the ground, pressed close together as if they could never be separated. In the distance came the sounds of cars, voices, and the endless bustle of the city. But on this small balcony, there was only peace, only the fragrance of flowers, and only each other. George lowered his head and kissed Serena's little cheek, then kissed Willow's forehead. "Let's go inside," he said. "It's getting chilly out here." "Okay." Holding their daughter, they walked back into the house and gently closed the door behind them. Outside, the moon still shone brightly, casting its gentle light over the city and over everyone returning home. Those long waits, those tears of disappointment, those feelings of unwillingness and regret had all become distant memories, scattered into the night by the wind. And true happiness never needs someone standing at the edge of a cliff, on the verge of falling, to prove that it exists. It is right here, in a bowl of hot soup, in an embrace, in a glance, in a home, in every ordinary day, quietly growing, blooming, and bearing fruit, like those lilies, needing no words, yet filling the air with their fragrance.